It's important if you're going to use sensitive material in your art, whether it's a TV show, a movie, or even a video game, that it's used wisely, that it's done well. And it's done in a way where it elevates the story and benefits the story and helps us understand the characters better, or it helps the characters improve and be better people. And if it's just used just cause, then I don't have any interest in that. 2024 was a really strong year for anime. There are a lot of new titles that came out, like Look Back. It was a film out of Amazon Prime that I really enjoyed. It told a story about artwork and friendship. There are a lot of new shows in regards to anime that came out in 2024, one being Apothecary Diaries and Frieren. Those are two shows that I really, really enjoyed. Other titles such as The Elusive Samurai, Kaiju Number 8, Windbreaker, A Sign of Affection, and Solo Leveling were a couple of shows that I really enjoyed, as well as Delicious in Dungeon. That's one that I've actually been rewatching recently, and I am absolutely in love with the story. Another show that really stood out in the year 2024 in terms of anime was Dandadan. A lot of people were really excited for Dandadan to come out because it was one of the most anticipated titles for 2024 in terms of anime. And when the trailer first dropped, it basically went viral online. And so when the show started releasing weekly, people were tuning in, talking about it, and just gushing over the wildly unique story that Dandadan brings to the viewers. It's the kind of show that immediately hooks you in, and it is refreshingly original. Now, there are a lot of supernatural anime that are out there, such as JJK, Black Butler, Tokyo Ghoul, Death Note, and Mob Psycho 100. But Dandadan is an anime that stands in a league of its own due to the amazing animation style, the strong voice acting, and ultimately the beautiful creativity and the snappy humor that blends all together to make it such a masterpiece. I really enjoyed watching Dandadan. I thought it was a very unforgettable roller coaster ride. There were a lot of things that I liked about the show. First of all, the fast paced animation, along with the stunning and high energy action sequences, makes it a standout anime. And also, the high quality animation, along with the supernatural elements of the story, really elevated the narrative of the story. And I really enjoyed it. I also loved the characters in Dandadan, Momo and Okarun. I felt Momo was very fun. She's really sweet, but she's also headstrong. And, Okarun is nerdy and he's a little awkward, but he is lovable and charming. And their friendship that could bud into a potential romance was something that drew me in and made me fall in love with the show. And I really appreciate the fact that it looks like the show is going to take its time with the romance, because sometimes with any kind of show where there's a male and female lead, it looks like the romance is going to be rushed or forced upon them just because it's a male and female lead. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it's earned, but this time around, it looks like it's going to be something where the story is going to take its time to build the dynamic between Momo and Okarun. If a relationship does bloom, it is something that is worth waiting for. A lot of times when they do introduce a romance in a story where there's a male and female lead, it does sometimes sideline the female character, but because Momo has such interesting psychic powers, she plays a very pivotal role in the show. I don't think that she's going to be sidelined. If the romance does come up, I think it's just going to elevate her story, and I think that's great. So those are all the things that I do like about Dandadan. Now let's get into why we're here. Talk about the things that I don't like. Now, let's start at episode 1. Episode 1, Momo and Okarun first meet and they find out that they have very different opinions. Okarun is the kind of guy who is into aliens and sci-fi, but he doesn't believe in spirits, ghosts, or anything like that. Momo is someone who believes in psychic powers, spirits, ghosts, but she doesn't believe in aliens. So the two of them decide to set each other on a dare. Momo dares Okarun to go to an abandoned tunnel where there is possibly a spirit there and see if he can catch the spirit. Okarun sends Momo to an abandoned building where there has been sightings of aliens. And when Momo goes to the abandoned building, she does see aliens. However, these aliens kidnap her, they strap her to a chair, they strip her of her clothing and her underwear, and they say they are going to harvest her pleasure so that they can procreate with her. Now, right off the bat, that was really weird to me and it made me feel very uncomfortable because both of these characters are underage. So having to watch an underage girl like be laid out like that in her underwear, it just set me off and I didn't like that. Essentially, the scene is sexual harassment. And luckily, the scene wraps up pretty quickly. But the whole time, I was just like, someone please put some clothes on her. Someone please give this girl some clothes. Why is she out here? But like, ugh. So that's just the first episode. And to be very honest, at that point, I was feeling kind of iffy about it because I know the general rule when it comes to watching anime is that you give it 3 episodes because that will allow you to, get to know the characters, understand the story the anime is set in, understand, the plot and all the different devices that go into this narrative. And then after episode 3, you'll decide whether you like the show or you want to drop the show. And at episode 1, I kind of wanted to drop it, but I thought, let's give it another episode. Let's see how it does. And episode 2 really did make me forget about episode 1 because episode 2 had such a strong story, amazing animation, and we got to see the awakening of Okaru's powers. So at that point, I was really interested and I wanted to see what was next. Overall, as I continued to watch the show, I was very interested. I thought that everything was really well done. The story was funny. The animation was spectacular. There were non-stop surprises within the show, and I felt like Dandadan had that one slip up in episode 1 and that the rest of the story just proves that it's this high energy anime that perfectly balances the absurd humor with really epic action sequences. And by the time I got to episode 8, I was like, hey, I really like this show. But then I got to episode 9 and I decided that I'm going to drop this show because in episode 9, the main characters are all in their underwear for the majority of the episode. And then at one point, Momo and Okaru are in a sexually suggestive position. And that made me feel even more uncomfortable. So that's when I decided I'm not watching Dandadan anymore. This show is not for me. Because when it happens in the first episode, you just kind of push past it because you just think, hey, they're just establishing that these are evil characters. They're weird. They're strange. They're not going to show up properly again in the show. You don't have to worry about it. But if this is something that happens again, then I'm going to go off the assumption that this is going to be commonplace in the story. And if it is commonplace in your story to put underage characters in sexually explicit scenes, then that's not a story that I need to know about, be a part of, have any interest, or invest in. I don't want to be a part of that. Because to be honest, many anime fans already sexualize a lot of anime characters, whether they're underage or overage, without it being put so brazenly in the show. And I don't like that. Because I feel like if you make it commonplace in your story to over sexualize your underage characters, then you're opening the door for predatory fans to feel comfortable saying they're a fan of your show. It feels very clear to me that the excessive use of this content is only for shock value. It's not really to, further the character's dynamic. It's not really to elevate the story in any way. It doesn't benefit the story narratively. It just feels unnecessary and it's weird. And I just want to say, I'm not against using sensitive material such as sexually explicit scenes or hard to talk about topics. If you're going to integrate that into your story, that's fine. I think that's great. I think that's okay. But I want you to use it in a thoughtful way. For Dandadan, with the scenes that they have, it feels like they're exploitative by nature. I don't want to take any part in that. It's important if you're going to use sensitive material in your art, whether it's a TV show, a movie, or even a video game, that it's used wisely, that it's done well, and it's done in a way where it elevates the story and benefits the story and helps us understand the characters better, or it helps the characters improve and be better people. And if it's just used just cause, then I don't have any interest in that. And I was thinking about Dandadan and these scenes and how they felt very off-putting to me. They made me feel very uncomfortable. And I'm not someone who shies away from content that can make you uncomfortable. And it made me think about this video game that I played recently called Mouthwashing. Now, Mouthwashing is an indie psychological horror game. The game follows the crew of the spaceship Tulpur, and the spaceship crashes into a meteor mid-journey, leaving the survivors to fend for themselves. The survivors are Captain Curly, co-captain Jimmy, co-pilot and nurse Anya, Swansea, and Daisuke. With dwindling food supplies and dwindling air as well, Jimmy declares himself acting captain as a result because after the spaceship crashes into a meteor, he accuses Curly, their captain, of causing the crash after going postal. And due to these dwindling resources, the crew resorts to drinking the mouthwash that they find out that they are transporting. They also try to keep their captain alive with a limited amount of medical supplies they have on board. Now, as you play the game, it switches perspectives between Jimmy after the crash happens and Curly before the crash happens. So you can kind of see what happened before and after. It's a game of survival, but it's also a mystery game as well, because you're trying to figure out why did Curly crash the spaceship or who crashed the spaceship, and you're trying to figure out a way so that everybody can survive and what's going on this spaceship. As I was playing the game, it became clear to me that Jimmy, who is the protagonist, and you kind of think he's supposed to be the good guy, it becomes clear that he is not the good guy. As you continue to play the game, you can see that the story is going downhill. But the story was going downhill even before the plane crash due to interpersonal conflicts. And one of the biggest conflicts that you discover when you're playing the game is the fact that Jimmy abused Anya. Now, who is Anya, and how does this influence the story of Mouthwashing? So Anya is the nurse on board of the ship, like I said previously, and when you're playing as Curly in the flashbacks, she reveals to Curly that she is pregnant with Jimmy's child, but she's afraid to tell Jimmy. She even said that she hid the only gun on board to protect herself. And it is implied to the player that the encounter she had with Jimmy was non-consensual. And to be honest, even before this reveal, I could kind of tell through Anya's interactions with Curly that she was uncomfortable around Jimmy and that Jimmy wasn't someone that was easy to get along with. But this reveal gives us context as to why she was uncomfortable with him. It also gives us context to Jimmy's actions on the ship because after the crash, when we're playing in the present day, Jimmy would refuse help from other crew members, and he would also avoid taking responsibility when things would go wrong. He kept acting like he was trying to make things right, but he would always justify his mistakes. Jimmy seems like a guy who's in over his head as the self-appointed captain, but really he's just someone who skirts responsibility, and all of these traits are a reflection of his toxic behavior because he didn't have to appoint himself as captain in order to help the crew. He could just help the crew. He could just be helpful. But he appointed himself as captain because he is someone who is obsessed with power and control. And while I was playing the game, I was trying to figure out why would Curly crash the ship. Because when you're playing as Curly in the flashbacks, he seems like a really nice guy. Everybody seems to get along with him pretty well. I mean, Jimmy's kind of short with him sometimes, but they seem to have good camaraderie for the most part. But when Anya tells him what Jimmy did, he prioritizes Jimmy's feelings over Anya's safety. He wants to keep the peace rather than confront Jimmy for abusing Anya, but his complicity doesn't protect Anya. He doesn't even comfort her when she tells him what happened. Instead, Curly tells her that he'll handle it because he's known Jimmy for a long time. And I understand that as a captain, it is your job to maintain order and to keep the peace and make sure that everyone gets along, but when someone comes to you and they say that your employer abused me, they violated me, and your first response is to make sure that the abuser doesn't get mad, you're prioritizing the feelings of the person who did the wrongdoing instead of the victim who was hurt. Thus, the victim does not feel heard, they don't feel safe, and they don't feel acknowledged. And this kind of behavior reinforces a culture where victims are silenced and abusers are shielded. Nonetheless, Anya told Jimmy that she's pregnant, and Jimmy got upset, so Curly went to go confront him, and he's urging him to take responsibility for his actions. Jimmy, of course, does not want to do that, and he tells Curly that if it is found out that Anya's pregnant, Curly will get in trouble too, because he's the captain of the ship, basically saying, if I go down, I'm going to take you with me. And then Curly, left with no other choice, he lets Jimmy go. And Jimmy, realizing that he is about to be laid off when they make this delivery. He realizes that Anya will tell people that she's pregnant and how that happened. And he is also jealous of Curly. He decides to crash the ship into a meteor in a failed murder suicide bid. Curly realizes what he did and he tries to stop it. Thus, when the ship crashes and he's in the cockpit, he gets gravely injured to the point where he is disabled, he cannot move, and that's the result. I think that the game was switching the perspectives between Jimmy and Curly. It helps the player understand moral ambiguity, and it also makes the characters inseparable from their actions because we can see how Jimmy appoints himself as captain because he wants to take control of the situation. He was jealous of Curly because Curly was control, he was the captain, everybody liked him, but as the self-appointed captain, he didn't do any better of a job than Curly did. And Curly, he was so focused on keeping the peace and making sure Jimmy didn't go out of control, but forgetting the fact that he needs to comfort Anya, who is the person that he must, take care of as his employee. He in turn fails her. Another thing that I remember from playing Mouthwashing was in the initial gameplay when Jimmy was tasked with giving Curly painkillers because Anya was too creeped out to do it. And the thing is, the game never showed Jimmy giving Curly the painkillers. We just hear it. And through hearing it, it's very clear that Jimmy is not doing it in a way that he is supposed to be doing it. So it feels like Jimmy is taking advantage of the fact that Curly has no autonomy and no agency, and he is giving him painkillers in a way that is not and it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable. I'm just saying that. And ultimately, this is Curly's fault. He took the path of inaction when Anya first told him what happened, and he experiences Jimmy's abuse firsthand. And towards the end of the game, we see that Anya has taken her own life. And when you're playing as Jimmy, he doesn't really stop to see the fact that Anya is dead or even mourn her or acknowledge her dead body. He goes for the gun that she hid, and Curly immediately starts laughing because he realizes that Anya was right the whole time. And he sees that if he had acted sooner, this could have all been prevented. This is the kind of storytelling that I love when it's explorative. Explorative storytelling challenges audiences to confront uncomfortable truths and reflect on issues that are hard to talk about, like rape culture, like toxic masculinity. And when you look at exploitative storytelling, instead of, trying to confront uncomfortable truths, they take things that are uncomfortable and they utilize it for shock value and for spectacle, ultimately trivializing something that could be a very in-depth and thoughtful exploration of the topic, but not doing in a way that is well done. And that's the thing that I like about Mouthwashing, because it uses sexual assault to drive its narrative. They use horror as the setting to highlight the issues of rape culture. They also use the psychological horror aspect of the video game to show everyone's deteriorating mental state after the crash. And the horror elements also emphasize Anya's experience in her trauma and her eventual death as well. The horror elements also underscore Mouthwashing's critique on toxic masculinity and cultural indifference to abuse. Anya's abuse serves as the emotional and moral core of the game, tying the game's horror elements together to real world issues, while Dandadan uses sexual assault as a gag, as kind of a joke, thus trivializing the matter. And ultimately, it undermines the supernatural premise, and I feel like it hurts the narrative integrity of the story. And in the long run, I really think that Dandadan with these like really weird scenes are just going to alienate potential viewers and potential diehard fans who are just looking for an anime that has substance. Now, I do want to talk about the fan reaction to, the scenes in Dandadan and also in Mouthwashing as well, because I know there are some people who do not agree with me and you're probably going off in the comments right now. In terms of Dandadan, fans of the show and the manga try to refute the fact that these scenes are weird and off-putting and unnecessary, and they refute it by saying that it works in the context of the show. And I want to say, just because the show is centered around the supernatural and there are going to be strange encounters with spirits and ghosts and, aliens, that does not excuse the exploitative scenes with these underage characters. A lot of fans will also excuse these scenes as part of the humor, but there's nothing funny going on here. It's weird and it's gross, and it's incredibly uncomfortable to watch these things on TV. I've also seen fans online say that the sexual content is used to display real life issues or portray the evilness of the different characters. And honestly, I feel like these things could be accomplished in a much more polished manner. And at this point, I don't see that. At this point, what I see is fan service for pedophiles. Now, I also want to talk about mouthwashing because there were a lot of fans that didn't really get the message behind the video game. Many of them are saying that, Curly is a hero, but that's only because they're comparing him to Jimmy. And honestly, you can compare a lot of people to Jimmy and they would seem like a hero. He's not a great guy, but Curly is not the hero because his inaction is what led to the ship crashing in the first place. He failed Anya, and calling him a hero means that you've missed the entire point of the game. And it's understandable if you're someone who played the game and you didn't pick up on the subtext that was going on in the narrative. I think that's fine. But I also think that it's very clear that toxic masculinity plays a big role in this game. And I get that it can be uncomfortable to talk about or acknowledge, but it's important that we do. Because you can't just boil the game down to, oh, Jimmy's a monster. Because there's more nuance than that. And I think that mouthwashing is really a marvel when it comes to psychological horror video games. And it's one of the games that I've played recently that have stuck with me for a while. And honestly, that's the difference between mouthwashing and Dandadan. Fans of mouthwashing find it hard to talk about themes of toxic masculinity, the culture of indifference towards abuse, rape culture, capitalism. They find it hard to talk about these themes in regards to the game. But there's a reason that these themes need to be talked about because it's part of the game. These things help us understand these characters and why they act the way that they do. It helps us understand these characters on a deeper level than Jimmy bad, Curly good. It's part of the story and it is embedded in every part. And I think that's important for us to understand that on more than a baseline level when it comes to mouthwashing. Because there are people who think that Anya and Curly should end up together. There are people who ship Curly and Jimmy together. And it's more than just shipping. It's more than that's just black and white. There are different shades of gray when it comes to mouthwashing. And once we break that down and analyze it and see it for what it is, then we can really get the story and see that these different themes are embedded in every part of it. And when it comes to Dandadan, listen, they have these scenes in the show and they are uncomfortable and weird to watch. And they don't add anything to the anime. They don't add anything to the story. They don't add anything to the characters or their dynamic. It feels almost voyeuristic in nature and it's very unsettling. Think about it this way. Without the reveal of Anya being abused by Jimmy, mouthwashing is just another psychological survival horror game. That's it. It would still be really good, but it wouldn't stand out in any meaningful way. If you take out the very unsettling and strange scenes in Dandadan, narratively, the story would still be strong. It would be high energy. It would be impactful. It would be amazing. It would still be a great anime. And honestly, I feel like if you take these scenes away, it would make the story better.